It's along those lines. We've got Gabriel in Pennsylvania. Thanks for waiting through my rant and the first caller.
Hi, yes. My name is Gabriel from Pennsylvania.
Hi, Gabriel.
How you guys doing? This is my first time calling. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's okay.
Don't be. I'll let John answer you, and that'll take all of the heavy hitting stuff off the table because he's so nice.
It's not about. No. Okay, this is my issue. I'm between being. I'm a Christian right now, but I've read and seen the evidence for evolution, and then I'm starting to question my Christianity, and I'm leaning towards being an agnostic or atheist. But what keeps bringing me back to the fact that there might be a God somewhere is superstition. I'm African raised, from Africa, and in Africa, this is dominant there. The superstitious things are very dominant. Now, let me be very specific in terms of voodoo and black magic. Now, I've seen things being done to people that, if superstitious things didn't exist, this thing shouldn't be happening to people. I'll give an example. I had a friend his family was really struggling financially. The dad did everything they could to make ends meet, but they couldn't. Things weren't working out for them. And he told me this personally, that the family went to consult a voodoo priest, and the voodoo priest did some rituals for them. And a couple of months later, they were very wealthy. I mean, they bought a new mansion in Africa. They had cars. I'm like, wow, and there's many instances for this. So I'm going back and saying, wow, so if a God doesn't exist, how are things like this possible? If superstitious things doesn't exist, I mean, I don't have any evidence there's no evidence to show that, the only evidence is that they weren't poor, all of a sudden they are rich. How do you explain something like this? How is that?
So this is exactly the same as the last call. So you have something happened, and your argument or your position is essentially, how do you explain that with anything other than a God?
I'm not saying that that's the reason why there should be a God, but if things, how can someone not have a job and still be driving and living in mansions and affording stuff?
I don't know. Did you talk to them and find out where their money came from?
Exactly, from the rituals that the voodoo priest did.
So you think rituals just produced money, out of thin air?
No. So,
Well, the money still came from somewhere, right? It didn't just appear.
Exactly. But it's not coming from his probably hard work or anything like that. People working hard to get.
So the question is, how do you find out? How do you reach a conclusion about where the money came from?
Of course, they have to come from a bank or something like that. I do know that. But what I'm saying is that hadn't they gone to that voodoo priest, they'll still be in that situation and, being in a poor situation. So until then, when they went to the voodoo priest and they did rituals, then things change.
Yeah, but why? Why did things change?
Exactly. That's what, I don't know why. I don't know. They have.
I don't know why. I don't know why either. What reason do you have to think that God or something supernatural is even a possible explanation for this?
That's what I'm saying. Before everything else, nothing changed except until that ritual was done. Don't you think there's something somewhere? At least, let's just say we are dependent on evidence, right? But for some reason we don't have evidence, but we can see a change.
Okay. Then in that situation, the only reasonable answer is I don't know.
There's no particular reason to think that whatever the voodoo priest did had anything to do
but
with.
I understand that I don't know what happened or what was done, but to me, like, because of that, I can't just dismiss that nothing superstitious like doesn't exist because there's no evidence for it.
So
to me,
nobody,
like that,
Gabriel, stop. Nobody is saying that you should conclude that nothing supernatural or superstitious exists. That's not the conclusion. The conclusion is, I don't have an explanation for this. Your conclusion is not, therefore there's no God. The atheist position is not, we have concluded there are no gods, and that's not it. The position, the properly skeptical position, is that the supernatural doesn't exist until there's actual evidence for it. And in order for that to be the case, you'd have to define it, and you'd have to show it interacts with reality. You'd have to have some way of testing it and demonstrating a connection between the two. Until that happens, there's no reason to think that the supernatural exists. It is essentially the null hypothesis that nothing supernatural exists, or nothing exists, natural or supernatural, until it is demonstrated to exist. And so when you run across this, the fact that somebody, hey, you know, on that day that they went and talked to the voodoo priest, what else did they do that day?
In terms of?
Did they eat breakfast that day?
Of course, they probably did.
Okay. Why is it that you're tying this to a visit to the voodoo priest and not tying it to breakfast? Maybe their breakfast made them rich.
Because they always eat breakfast and nothing has changed.
What was there anything else different that they did that day?
I don't know what they did different, but the based on what the voodoo priest did for them, and I showed them that what he has done.
What did the voodoo priest do for them? Because this is the problem.
I don't know. It's a ritual that he did. Rituals in Africa, when they do rituals, sometimes they slaughter animals, they present it to gods, and use it as an atonement for the gods to bring good wealth to people, and sometimes that causes things to change.
I'm fine with the idea that the voodoo priest did something, but what is the connection between what the voodoo priest did and what happened to them?
Exactly. If it didn't work, they only have got the money. And
you keep saying exactly when I ask a question.
No, I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming. I've seen most of your videos, and I do understand.
I don't think you do understand if you think it's likely that this is a demonstration of something supernatural.
He's just trying to walk you through the skeptical position, and that's to examine, okay, what's the situation? What happened that could have caused this result? And, I would ask you, how do you know any of this happened? Is this a story you heard? Is this something?
This is a friend of mine that I know.
These are people you know. Okay, so
this is personal. That's why. This is what I keep thinking about. That makes me not say, being I can't be an atheist because of that. Because I know the American culture doesn't see these things on a regular basis. But in Africa, when someone tells you, you better stop, bugging me because I can go to this voodoo priest and make something happen to you, immediately they stop because...
Okay, then have them go to the voodoo priest and make something happen to me.
I mean, I don't believe in I don't try to get involved in those things because, like I said, because sometimes there's consequences for all these things.
Yeah, you know what happens? You say there's consequences, but you know what happens when you encourage people not to investigate something out of fear? You increase the likelihood that people will think it's plausible. If you couch something in mystery and fear, you can't properly investigate it. If this voodoo priest can make someone rich, that is testable. Let's get a whole bunch of different people. We'll go to the voodoo priest. We'll let him do his rituals, and we will see which ones of those people actually get rich. If he can consistently make people rich by sacrificing a chicken, and we can get enough information to show that there seems to be some kind of causal connection between these two, it's the same thing we've done for prayer. When we've tested prayer, we've tested intercessory prayer. We've had a bunch of people praying for specific individuals, and then you see whether or not they improve or not. And it turns out that prayer works at exactly the rate of chance, with the exception of when people know they're being prayed for, and then it works less.
But it's strange that, like something like this, I know about prayer and I know about all those, facts that you're talking about, because I've read into it. But that's why I'm trying to get some answers into this kind of things. And, because, for instance, again, I'll give you this one last example, and because I don't want to take too much of your time. I had a friend over in this country, right, and he was with this girl, and they got a kid together, and for some, later in the relationship, they broke up and stuff like that, and for some reason, this girl wanted to take the guy to court. I think it was child support or something like that, even though the guy was providing for them, but I think she wanted more money, so she planned to take him to court and everything like that. And the guy told her not to do that. He doesn't want the government taking his money and blah, blah, blah. So eventually the girl didn't agree. She said, I'm definitely taking you to court, making sure to get more money from you and stuff. Like she was deliberately going to do it. So he spoke to his brother back home in Africa, and his brother asked him, what piece of item of her do you still have with you? Oh, and he said, luckily he still had one of her shoes that she probably left in his house when they split up. And he said, just send me those shoes. So he mailed those shoes back to his brother back home in Africa. And what his brother did was that he took those shoes to a voodoo priest. And the voodoo priest did a ritual on those shoes. And when it came time for the day for them to show up to court, the lady didn't show up. Right.
So basically, if I send my shoe to a voodoo priest, he can make my alarm clock not go off.
No. This, like,
I'm intentionally mocking this because there's So these are stories. Okay. First of all, I have no idea for all I know, you could be making them up, or you could have heard them from somebody else who was making them up. But even just looking at the story. The fact that he sent off somebody's shoes and they didn't show up to court, there's no way to demonstrate a connection between those two events.
There could have been any number of reasons she didn't show up in court.
So for instance, if I say, okay, I'm going to do this for you and this is what's going to happen, and I do it and those things happen, I'm trying to say...
Then we need to actually investigate a single instance. This is what the fake psychics and they're relying on. When we test them, they fail. The James Randi Educational Foundation for years had $1 million prize for anybody who could demonstrate any paranormal or supernatural event claim that they could do. And yet nobody ever even passed the preliminary examination, because as soon as you start testing this stuff, all of a sudden it fails. And so how many other people have gone to this voodoo priest and asked for something to happen and it didn't happen? If those stories aren't getting spread around, and the only stories that are getting spread around are the ones where it appears that something happened, then that is a confirmation bias.
I mean, you can speak to any African and they'll tell you, ask them about black magic, voodooism. I mean,
okay.
There's even videos on the internet about people holding voodoo dolls and pinching the voodoo doll while it's affecting someone from somewhere.
There are magic tricks that I've done that people think are supernatural. There are plenty of other magicians who are far more accomplished than I am who have done tricks that people would think are supernatural. It doesn't impress me to say, oh, you could go to Africa and there's all kinds of people that tell you what happened with black magic. Do you think it's the case that why is it the case that it happens there in areas that are steeped in fear and an inability to investigate? Why isn't this stuff being investigated regularly and demonstrated to be true?
Because people think that they already see the results for it, so they don't have to investigate it. I mean, if someone says, they can do this and you go mad, and they've actually seen people that have gone mad from someone doing a ritual, no one is going to investigate that. What do you have to investigate? I mean, someone says, I can do this, and this is what's going to happen.
So the problem, Gabriel, the problem here is that something happened and people reached a conclusion about why, and now they aren't open to questioning it.
I mean, what question is there when I said, I'll do this and this is what's going to happen?
The question is, did you actually do it, and how did you do it? How can we draw a connection between, hey, look, I could make all kinds of claims. So, for example, I could say, tomorrow you're going to meet somebody new who's going to talk to you about a new job opportunity. Now, if that happens to you tomorrow, will you conclude that I'm psychic or have some way of predicting the future?
No, because you didn't say you're a psychic or you're a voodoo priest or something.
Okay, I'm a voodoo priest, and I'm telling you that tomorrow you're going to meet somebody who's going to talk to you about a new job opportunity. If you meet somebody tomorrow and they talk to you about a new job opportunity, are you reasonable in concluding that I am in fact a voodoo priest who can make those predictions?
No.
Then it's not true for the others as well.
I haven't come to you with any specific problem of mine. You just mentioned job opportunity.
Yeah.
So
we're getting nowhere.
I mean, I understand, and that's what I've tried. I think that, okay, like you said, science doesn't have any evidence, or there's no testable things to.
No, I didn't say that. I specifically talked about potential. Gabriel, no, stop. I specifically said that depending on the claims, there are ways to test this. We have, in fact, tested intercessory prayer and other things. I specifically asked, why do you think this hasn't been tested? And you're like, oh, these people just assume that that there's a connection here. That's the problem. They should stop assuming and start investigating.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't need any extra examination to when someone says this is where we went and they did this in front of us and they said after doing this in a couple of weeks this is going to happen.
Yeah, then you are by definition not a skeptic or not being skeptical and not being rational. You are willing to reach a conclusion about a connection between two things without sufficient investigation. And by the way, when I asked you, if I told you this was going to happen, and it happened, you wouldn't believe, which means that in addition, you just a minute ago said, hey, if somebody says they're going to do this and it happens, I don't need to investigate further. That's a lie, because when I asked you if I did that, you were not willing to
investigate further.
What?
How would we investigate further?
How would you investigate further? It depends on what is actually being claimed to do. If I can predict the future, it's really easy. We just start going through my predictions and seeing how many of them actually match up. And at the end of all this, if I'm able to predict with 90% confidence what's going to happen tomorrow, then we've demonstrated that I can apparently predict what will happen with 90% confidence. But you know what we haven't demonstrated? How I can do that. We haven't demonstrated whether it's supernatural, whether it's trickery. And yet you're willing to say that, oh, there's all these people running around who the voodoo guy tells them this, and it happens, and therefore it's real. You haven't sufficiently investigated that to reach the conclusion that you reached. And neither have they. Or at least we're unaware of any proper research.
Because, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. It's like you're taking a medication and it heals you. We can go to a lab and actually see see what the mechanism of the drug does and causes you to be healed, or to be well, or to heal you from an infection. I do understand that fact. But again, like, I'm not saying you are saying this, but there's no testable things in terms of superstition, because it doesn't apply to science. All we can see is
wrong.
A change.
It's still testable. It's still testable. You can set up an experiment to show cause and effect without understanding the mechanism necessarily.
At a minimum, you can demonstrate correlation.
I mean, if I have $0 in my bank account and all of a sudden I say I'm rich, all we have to go and do is look at my bank account, correct?
Yeah, but the question is, how did you become rich?
Oh, this voodoo guy did some rituals for me.
How did you determine that what the voodoo guy did is what made you rich? There's a fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this, which is why I asked about breakfast. Just because something happens after breakfast doesn't mean that breakfast caused it. And just because something happens after you visit a witch doctor doesn't mean that the witch doctor or voodoo priest caused it.
Well, and either way, you're reacting to a story that you were told. Maybe the voodoo priest gave him a bunch of money, for all you know.
No, I'm not reacting to a story. This is things that happen. There are a lot of things that people. Like I said, this is something that if you're in an African culture, you understand. You will easily understand this because it happens in before Christianity came to Africa.
The truth about the supernatural, you have no reason to think that it's cultural.
I mean, before Christianity came to Africa, Africans were practicing, their own culture, and the vast majority of their own culture was black magic and all that. That's how, when people went to wars, they used African wars. I'm talking about. They used black magic, the one with the most potent black magic.
Whoa. How did you determine that there's any such thing as potent black magic?
Because some were powerful than others.
Some were what?
Some of the culture, some of the black magics were powerful than others.
How do you determine that there's any such thing as powerful black magic?
Yeah, because people there are some things some people can claim to do, and some people cannot do that. Some voodoo priests cannot do certain things other voodoo priests claim they can do.
Where's the evidence that they've done anything?
People can claim anything they want to. It doesn't mean it's true.
That's why when you say evidence, the evidence is what we see in the neighborhood. Like I keep telling you, I can't go and test it in the science lab. All I see is that he wasn't rich. All of a sudden, he's rich, and he's not working. He doesn't have a good job to be rich, to be affording all those things.
Sure, and what I'm telling you is that someone who isn't rich, who becomes rich, does not in any way explain how they became rich.
I don't even think you can necessarily assume that he's rich just because he could have borrowed a bunch of money. How do you know he's rich? Did you look at his bank account?
Things, I think it's from a different cultural background. That's why you may not understand. But I do urge you to speak to Africans who know these things very well, and they'll tell you.
Why? Gabriel, what evidence can they possibly present of a connection? All they can do is tell me stories. This happened, and then this happened. I have no way of verifying that those things actually happened, and I don't have a way to demonstrate a connection between them.
That's why things don't just happen like that, right? Things don't just happen, right?
We're right back to the beginning with the fallacy of argument from ignorance. You're basically asserting. Yeah, you don't think that people don't show up in court? I think it happens all the time here.
I mean, but I didn't even finish that story. Later on, she said, she never wanted to take him to court. How is it that someone who was willing to take someone to court all of a sudden has a change of heart? Something happened.
So people can't have a change at heart about whether or not they want to take somebody to court?
People do that all the time without voodoo black magic here.
I mean, I do understand where you're coming from. That's why I said you have to actually go to Africa.
No, you don't understand where I'm coming from, or there's no way the words "you have to go to Africa" could possibly come out of your mouth.
Exactly, because
you don't get to say exactly. We're done with that. You have to go to Africa.
That's special pleading.
Yeah.
Africa is not any different than anywhere else. You can either show that...
Well, even if it were, then people could go there and investigate.
Yeah.
But me going to Africa to hear stories about people who say, I went to the witch doctor and the next day this woman didn't show up in court, that's a waste of my time and money to go to Africa to hear stories like that. Plus, I can hear those stories without going to Africa. You can have everybody in Africa who has had an experience with a voodoo priest. Just set up a web forum, put one in the public square where they can all go in and here's my story. And at the end of the day, what you'll have is a whole bunch of stories. You won't necessarily have evidence of any sort of causal connection.
Well, and I would have been... That's why you have to investigate. You don't just say, "Oh, well, somebody told me this happened, and therefore it worked." I would talk to the woman and say, "Why didn't you come to court?" And I would talk to the priest and say, "What exactly did you promise to do? Did you say I will make sure that she doesn't show up in court, or did you say I will help your situation?"
Yeah.
And something vague like that, and then you interpret anything that happens as, well, he was right, he did it, he helped the situation. Well.
What I'd really like to do is to take all those people from Africa that you're referencing who believe that the voodoo priests have black magic that can actually affect things, and have all of them call Stephanie and tell her their stories, so that when she gets done explaining to them how they cannot reasonably reach that conclusion, she might come to understand how she cannot reasonably come to reach the conclusion she's reached. But